Hi, everybody, and thanks to the Anti-Defamation League for having me today. Happy to share with you some thoughts on the recent election. I've worked on 4 presidential elections. I've been lucky enough to win 3 of them. So I think I've learned a few things over the last couple of decades about what they take to win. I've developed a kind of mantra that I've used as I talk about presidential elections. They're usually about big things, not small things. They're about the future, not the past. And they're about their lives, not your life. And when I've explained those to candidates, I say that doesn't mean your biography and what you've done doesn't matter. But it means ultimately you have to connect with the attitudes and values of the people that you're asking to put you in the highest office in the country and the most powerful job on earth. Now, when you're an incumbent president, it's a little bit different than when you're a challenger. Incumbents have big advantages in this country. In fact, if you go back to 1900, there have been 20 candidates who have sought re-election to a second term, and only 6 or 7 of them have done that. The other thing to keep in mind is that, we are generally a fairly closely divided country. I often say we're pretty much a 50-50 country. It's probably not exactly 50-50, but if you look at it, Barack Obama, when he was reelected in 2012, he was only the 7th U.S. president in history to be reelected with more than 50% of the vote in both his elections. So when I say we're a pretty closely divided country, we don't have a lot of landslides. Landslide is usually considered 55, 45, a 10-point win. That's a big win. We rarely have those things. And when you're running as the incumbent, it is ultimately going to be a referendum on you. And I think Donald Trump, as president, didn't fully understand that or appreciate that. When you're the incumbent, what that means, if it's a referendum on you, you have to inoculate against your weaknesses, and you have to really leverage your strengths, and you have to do it in a way which, as I said, is forward-looking to the future and connects with the lives and the lived experiences of people. So when you think about what this election came down to, looking at the exit polls, which come out right after Election Day, that night even, there were really 3 salient issues that voters said were most important to them. One was the coronavirus, absolutely. The other was the state of the economy. And lastly was racial equality and fairness and racial justice in America. Now, I think Biden, if you take it from his perspective, he ran a campaign very focused on restoring decency and respect in our country. It was consistent with who he was. It was consistent with his values. And it also set up a great contrast for him with President Trump, for whom those are not the strongest qualities. Now, I said a minute ago we're a 50-50 country, but that's not really true. We're really probably about a 40-40 country with about 20% of people who are independents or moderates who fall in the middle. And people say, oh, there really aren't any independents sometimes. There really aren't any moderates, are there? And I say, of course there are. There are people who do go back and forth. But the key to winning a presidential election is winning the middle. If we are as divided as I say we are, and I believe I'm right on this, then you do have to win voters in the middle. It means neither candidate can get to a win appealing only to his or her base. And so if you think of it as 40% liberal, 40% conservative, 20% moderate or independent, you can see what I mean about having to win, not just in the popular vote, but also in the states you need to win, swing states where, of course, independents and moderates become even more important. So when you look overall nationally at what happened this year, Joe Biden well outperformed Hillary Clinton. Both won the popular vote, by the way. But Joe Biden outperformed Hillary Clinton when it came to those important groups I just mentioned. So when you look at the vote among independents in this election, Joe Biden got 54% of them. Hillary Clinton 4 years ago only got 42% of the independent vote. The same pattern held up for moderate voters. Biden got 64% of moderate voters in this election. Hillary Clinton got 52%. So he expanded with exactly the voters that he needed to expand. And that gets to a second group, and some of this is related to those moderate and independent voters, but I've been talking about them for quite a while, and they are suburban voters. There was a point this spring in the height of the first round of COVID and in the aftermath of George Floyd's death, where Fox News has excellent polls. For public polls, they're as good as it gets in the media realm. But Fox News had a poll back in late June, early July, after the death of George Floyd, that showed a group of voters, suburban voters, that Donald Trump had won by 4 points in 2016, and he was now trailing 18 points with suburban voters in their polling. Now, that lead stayed pretty constant through the fall, although ultimately by Election Day, it shrank quite a bit. It tightened up. Nobody thought he would maintain an 18-point lead in the suburbs. But nonetheless, he still carried the suburbs. He carried them by 3 points. Now, that sounds like a small amount. And Hillary Clinton only lost the suburbs to Trump. He won them by 4 points last time. But suburban voters comprise roughly 50% of the electorate, 49 to 51, depending on the year. So that means that's a 7-point swing in Biden's favor. And looks like he's winning the popular vote by just over 3 points. And that means that shift in suburban voters gave him half that margin that he needed nationally. And that also came into play in the battleground states that are critically important to win. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, that you heard so much about on TV, about the blue wall that Democrats lost in 2016 and needed to maintain. And not only did he win those 3 states because of the shift in suburban voters, but he also is picking up states like Arizona, holding Nevada, probably winning Georgia. Some places have called Georgia for him, all of which have growing suburban populations around their major metropolitan areas. So on the structure of the electorate and where Biden had a win, he succeeded, and Trump underperformed significantly with some of these groups versus his 2016 performance. Now, if you're running Trump's campaign, by the way, you've got to be looking at these numbers and seeing the same thing everybody else is seeing. The challenge there is, can you persuade him to act differently? One other interesting note that I saw in the exit polls is that the plurality of voters said they made up their minds in September. Well, September was the first presidential debate. And if you remember what I said a moment ago about restoring decency and respect as being very important in this election, on the night of the first debate, Donald Trump showcased his worst, least liked qualities about him as a president and as a human being. He was arrogant. He was rude. He was trying to bully Joe Biden. He talked over the moderator. He talked over Joe Biden. So profoundly disruptive that the debate commission, for the first time ever, had to change the debate rules for the second debate, or the third debate, as it turns out, or the last one, mute his microphone and Biden's microphones when they weren't speaking. Unprecedented. So his demeanor played into his negative. Remember, I said you have to inoculate against your weaknesses and leverage your strengths. So his demeanor on that night and throughout the campaign, mocking Joe Biden, ignoring the coronavirus, and I'll get to the coronavirus in a minute, just was playing to his weaknesses. And it says something about the man's character. He's got some great skills as a politician, but he also has enormous weaknesses, and they did him in this campaign as well, not just Biden's strength. Now, if you look at the issues that matter, and 3 came to the top, according to the exit polls. And these are not all of equal importance, but they were the 3 most important issues that voters cited in terms of what they were going to be voting on. One issue was the economy. A second issue was racial inequity and racism. The third issue was the coronavirus. And I'm going to talk a bit about all 3, but not quite in that order. I want to save the racial inequality for the last one. On the first issue, the economy. This was what Donald Trump was touting as his strength. But in truth, Joe Biden won among voters who said the economy was the most important issue. He won with voters who, in particular, I shouldn't say he won on it all over, but he won it with voters who said their economic condition was somewhat worse than it was 4 years ago. Now, they totaled 60% of the electorate. So first of all, that number tells you that most voters in America don't see the greatest economy in history that Donald Trump said that he saw. Now, if you take those voters again, who said their economic condition, family circumstances were somewhat worse or worse than they were 4 years ago. Among voters who said they were the same, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump in the vote by 30 points. That's a massive number. Against those who said it was worse, he beat him by 51 points, an astronomical number. So you take this issue that Trump thought he owned, but it's a great example of him being out of touch with the lives of working people and what they were feeling in the economy. Think about it. How could you be out of touch when you know there are 10 million households today with someone who has become unemployed because of coronavirus? You can't just bully people into believing what you say. Their lived experiences are going to matter. So that's terribly important. That was his strength, and he really squandered what he believed was his strength and lost voters over it. On the third issue, and I said I was going to jump to the third one first, the coronavirus, 17% said this was the most important issue they were voting for. Biden won these voters by 81 to 17. Now, it's a small group. It's 81 to 17. But if you think about a gap of 70 points among a group that comprises roughly 17% of the population, you're getting a net advantage with that group by about 10 points, and that is significant. And the question that at my firm we've been asking since the spring, but was also asked, as it turns out, in the exit polls, what is more important now, containing the coronavirus or beginning, even if it means hurting the economy, or rebuilding the economy, even if it means the coronavirus gets worse? Well, I'm sure I don't have to tell you folks what the real result was in the exit polls. By 51 to 42, voters were saying contain the coronavirus, even if it means the economy will take longer to recover. So I left the last question here because it's a topic for you folks that I know is very important, which is justice, fairness, and the fair treatment of all people. We know this. We've worked with the Anti-Defamation League. We're great believers in fighting hate for good. In this particular election, the exit polls asked a question about racial inequality, and 20% said that was the most important issue to them. 70% in the poll said that racism is an important problem in the U.S. And among those voters, they voted 70 to 28 for Joe Biden, almost 3 to 1. Now, the exit polls didn't ask about a whole lot of other inequities out there, but other polls have had. We did a poll in Benenson Strategy Group called an omnibus poll of voters sometime during the campaign in late spring. And we asked about an array of different groups. And I won't go into all of them now. It was a very long list. But on almost every single one of the groups we tested, people did not believe Donald Trump showed the respect that those groups needed and deserved. Women, African Americans, Latinos, immigrants. I could go down the whole list. They saw him as intolerant. They saw him as lacking the decency and respect to be president of the United States. Many of them that we looked at, we asked, as I said, does he respect people of other races? By Biden in the national voter polls, 42% said he did, 35% said Trump did. On being compassionate, empathetic, unify the country, qualities that were desperately important to people in the next president right now. What we found is that on being compassionate, Donald Trump had a 13-point deficit against Joe Biden. On being empathetic, which is similar to compassion but slightly different, again, he had a 12-point deficit on whether that applied to him as opposed to Joe Biden. And on being able to unify the country, Joe Biden had an 8-point advantage. And at the end of the day, I think if it all comes back to what are the big things that were going on in this election? And as I said, it was the economy, it was coronavirus, but it was at the end of the day restoring respect and decency in America. People want a president who they believe will care about them every day, even if they know that won't come true. But they want to know that that person cares about people like them. on the issues that Donald Trump thought was his strength, on the economy. In fact, he was tone deaf to the struggles of average families around America. He was tone deaf to the fact that they were having trouble making ends meet. The number of people who have gone on unemployment, who have increased their credit card debt during this time to meet basic expenses, and all polls that are out there show a trend that any responsible campaign candidate who wants to be president of the United States should have been aware of and should have done things differently for. But Donald Trump doesn't have those skills. He lacks the reparative skills you need to be president, because no president is perfect. You're going to make mistakes, but you have to show the American people that you understand their problems, you understand what their desires are, you understand what they want for the future, the big things, and you understand their lives. And Donald Trump's failure to connect on those three pieces of my mantra, and Joe Biden's ability to connect on all of them, is precisely why Joe Biden is the president-elect of the United States. So thank you very much. I hope next time I can see you all in person. I hope this gives you some insights from my vantage point and some fodder for conversations amongst yourselves. As I say, next year, hopefully we'll see you in person. Thank you very much.